Hello, I'm Terry David Mulligan, and this is Mulligan Stew, the podcast, music, film, food, and wine. We will get to the film, food, and wine part shortly. It's just that we have so much music to tell you about. How about Robbie Robertson, today's guest? He wrote and released a book 2 years ago about the early part of his life called Testimony. It's a fantastic read. It's one of the best music books I have ever read. Anyway, it starts by saying, Robbie Robertson's singular contribution to popular music have made him one of the most beloved songwriters and guitarists of his time. With songs like The Wait, The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down, and Up on Cripple Creek, he and his partners in the band fashioned music that has endured for decades, influencing countless musicians. Even though I've been playing Robbie's music for years, I was his guest at The Last Waltz in San Francisco, and some of the sound mixing for the screen in Los Angeles as a follow-up. He reveals things about his life in this book that very few people knew. For example, his adventures as a half-Jewish, half-Mohawk upbringing in the Six Nations Reserve in Ontario, heading for the Mississippi Delta, the home of the blues, at the age of 16, the wild early years with Ronnie Hawkins, as he calls it, the trial by fire of going electric with Bob Dylan on his 1966 world tour, all the way to Martin Scorsese's film and event called The Last Waltz in San Francisco, Winterland Ballroom. In going to Winterland, they were coming full circle. Their very first gig as a band was at Winterland Ballroom in San Francisco, and it was pretty much a bomb, and they felt they had to finish there. This is a very quick conversation. The first one I had, by the way, with Robbie, was never recorded. Apparently there was a ghost in the machine in this radio station, and what I was seeing was never recorded. So I had to beg his indulgence to do this follow-up interview a couple of days later. He was in a hotel in Calgary. It was just before Christmas, and he was dying to get home. Here's a conversation with Robbie Robertson. Tell me about the book and what it did for you in writing it. I've been down this road a bit with my own journey, and I found that it changed me. It changed my opinions. It changed my opinion of myself and the people and the paths that I crossed. What happened to you? Any epiphany there?
Well, it was writing this book, and I didn't know this going into it, but there was a tremendous sense of release in writing this book because all of these experiences, all of these musical, historical events that I've been so fortunate to be on the front lines of, to revisit that and to follow that path again from that point of view. I wrote this book from the point of view of when it was happening. I didn't know what was going to happen next.
Yep.
I didn't know what was around the next corner. And so reliving it in that kind of way, I don't know, when I was done writing this book, I felt so much lighter. I felt like this tremendous release. And now that I've set these stories free and, to share with people, it feels really good deep down in the soul.
It took a long time to get those words out.
Well, it's a process. And I wasn't sitting down to just write this book. I had, over time, I had a lot of other projects that I was working on. So I was, in the beginning, I was in a discovery process of what I was going to do structure-wise. I wanted to make this like a cinematic experience that you could actually see it as I was writing it. So I had to, it wasn't just slamming it down, I had to find those particulars, and I had to address it in a way that it just felt right.
Yep.
It just felt like that I was getting the same kind of feeling from it when I would think that I'd written the tune and it turned out pretty good. I needed to have that kind of feeling.
What part of you, of your makeup, can be attributed directly back to Six Nations, your birth and your growing up there? What part of you still exists today?
Well, it's still an extremely important place in my heart, and I'm in the midst of making some plans actually to go back there for a celebration that we're going to have. It was the place that turned me on to music in a personal way. It wasn't listening to music on the radio. It was playing music in a room with my relatives.
Yep.
And it was the first time that my hands touched the strings of the guitar. And I thought, there's something about this. and I was so drawn to it. It's the place that I first discovered storytelling to be something that pushed a spark in my soul,
yeah,
that lit the fire for this, that lit the fire for me to be able to write a book like this.
Robbie, you went to school on the Hawks. You did. You were part of the band, of course, but you went to school. You soaked it up like a sponge, and it prepared you for that moment when you and the guys became the band. But only you could hear the music in your heads. Nobody else was going to be doing what you were doing. What told you in your heart, in your soul, that this was the road for you and this was the way to go?
You know, at that young, I was 16 years old when I started with the Hawks. I was following a path. I didn't know where this path was leading, but coming from Canada, and I'm in the Deep South, I knew that I was on my way to the fountainhead, to where this music that I was so drawn to where it was born, and to be able to be learning, studying, getting better at what I was doing in the Mississippi Delta. Now, it felt like this is it. This is what my mission is.
Yep.
I thought I was on the path. But at 16 years old, you're just feeling your way along and hoping you don't mess up too much. So, I can't get too smarty pants about it or intellectual, because I really was just learning day by day.
But something was drawing you. Something was pulling you along. And it all showed itself in the tunes that you wrote before, during, and after your time with Bob Dylan. And I'm going to ask you about those songs in just a moment. But here's a question, I'm just straight off the top of my head. What effect did Bob have on you and the band? And conversely, what effect do you think you had on him?
Well, in the beginning, it was very clear. It was very clear to us that Bob had limited experience in playing with a band, and he was learning on the run too.
Yep.
And so every day that we had an experience in doing a concert and playing with him, just a little bit more came together. Because in the beginning, there was no beginning, middle, or end to the songs. We didn't know when it was going to start and when it was going to end. So we just had to be on our toes. After a while, Bob started to understand, how we give one another signals, that we're on a wavelength, and that we speak to one another in an invisible language that you can hear. So he was learning that as we were going along, and obviously Bob was changing a lot of the rules in songwriting, a lot of the rules in music, and he was opening doors. And we were right there as those doors were opening. So we were like the first ones to be able to walk right in. And, you know, you couldn't help, you know, I mean, people that had nothing to do with him were highly influenced by his work. We were right there. So obviously what, you know, our experience in being a band and being on the road and playing tight and playing together, all of that was rubbing off on him. And as he was going along and he was making new discoveries too, it was rubbing off on us.
I'm going to ask these next three questions because long after I'm gone, I want these words to stay behind so that others can school on them. And that is 3 songs that we know you for, we know the band for. The Wait, Dixie, and Cripple Creek. And I just, if you can, I know this is difficult, if you can, the core, most important thing about each of these songs, starting with The Wait. Where is it? What is it? How did it come to you?
Well, you know, in these things, when songs come to you, some people say come through you,
right, all
all of this stuff, the humble truth of this is it's all I could think of at the time. I wish, you know, now I was being influenced, which I've spoke about, you know, many times, that at the time I was going through, the Spanish filmmaker Luis Buñuel. I was going through a period of enjoying his movies and the surrealism in his storytelling and some thematic things in his films. That was happening, and also when it came at Big Pink, when it came time for me to really sit down and write songs for the band. Because, you know, in the past, whenever I had written songs, it would be like in the back seat of a car on the way somewhere, and I didn't have the atmosphere that I felt like that I was really doing something that I could do. I thought, we got to go in the studio tomorrow. Let me see if I can think of something. It's kind of like that. When we were at Big Pink, stuff, was coming back to me from my first experience of going from Canada down to the Mississippi Delta. And the characters and the names and all of these things were swirling around. And this was the first time that I had the opportunity to unlock that box and open it up and let that mythology out. So that came out in The Wait as an example of that. And I didn't know if the song was even going to make the cut when I wrote it. I wrote it and I thought, it's not bad, huh? We got something here. We'll see how the guys feel about it. And I had no idea it was what it was. After we recorded it, I thought, I've never heard anything quite like that before. That's a pretty good sign.
Yeah, and the night they drove Old Dixie down, if you talk about reading screenplays and being influenced by filmmakers, that's a film set to music and words. You can see it. It plays out in your mind. That's brilliant.
The idea that I was going to the South at 16 years old, the impression that it made on a 16-year-old, and how it lived up to what my imagination thought it would be. And the idea, somebody from down there, they just took this stuff for granted. They grew up with it. For me coming into that world with big, wide, innocent eyes, I thought, whoa, what a story. And the fact that when I went there, my connection to that world was from a Southern point of view.
Right.
Was from Levon and his family and Ronnie Hawkins and all of these characters down there. And it affected me so much that I couldn't help myself but write The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down.
And Robbie,
a Canadian.
And, yeah, of course. And Cripple Creek?
Cripple Creek I was having some fun writing this. And when I played it for the other guys, everybody cracked up. And because sometimes, I would play the other guys a song, they'd think, "Whoa, that's pretty good. Uh-huh. Should I come in on this part?" Or blah, blah. We would go to work on it. When I played them Cripple Creek, everybody just fell down laughing. And because of what happens in the story and the kind of realism in it and just using those terms to talk about, talk about some more inside things in all of that. So anyway, that was great. And when we sat down to play it, everybody was in the mood to do what we did on that song. After we recorded that song, again, I thought, I ain't heard that before.
Last Waltz. I realize it's almost impossible to speak about that. Well, you can. You've been speaking about it for 20 and 30 minutes at a time. But there was that moment, and I think we'll agree, for me anyway, I'm in the audience, I'm your guest, I'm there because of you, and you're on stage, four of the five band members are Canadian. Neil Young is on stage singing about North Ontario. Joni Mitchell is doing the vocals in behind. It's just pure, utter magic, and to this day, tears me up.
Well, what a beautiful collaboration. What a beautiful thing in time and space for the band Neil Young and Joni Mitchell to be together. Talk about Canadiana. Hello. I'm so proud of that. And to this day, Neil and Joni are still dear friends of mine, and we catch up every once in a while, and it's a highlight.
And now that you've survived all of this, truly you did survive all of this, ahead for you, will you become the filmmaker I thought you might be? Well,
I've experimented in that area. I produced 2 movies, and I found out in that process there's too many cooks in the kitchen. There's too many people involved. And you have to go through to get to the next doorway, to go through another doorway.
All right.
So I thought, you know what? If I hadn't have gotten into music at such a young age and had become addicted to playing music and storytelling, I might have turned out to be a film director. At this point, I love collaborating with Martin Scorsese. We do it all the time, and it's a complete joy. And there's some other filmmakers I work with, too. But I've got so much on my plate right now. I've got more book writing to do. I'm in the middle of a new record. There's a couple of TV series that we're in talks about. There's so many things going on right now. But I am going to write the follow-up to Testimony as well.
Right. Well, you didn't get those 300 pages in there that I've read about, so that's a good start to another book.
Oh, that's so nice of you to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, my friend.
Okay, take care of yourself, Terry.
Robbie Robertson. The book was called Testimony. A fantastic read. There is no shelf life on this book. This book is about his musical influences through the 60s, 70s, the music they made in the 80s. The band was the high water mark of where I wanted music to be. And he still continues to write. And he makes films. And sometimes he acts. You'll notice that he left off the book at The Last Waltz. The second part of this story concerns what happened after The Last Waltz and his nose-to-nose battle with Levon Helm. Thank you for listening to Mulligan Stew, the podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast and then tell one of your friends. Thank you for listening to Mulligan Stew.